If everyone could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Allback, we'll start it.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everyone. I believe we have a full quorum. Mary? All right, if we can quickly go around the room for introductions. My name is Brian Stedeker, Mayor of the City of Hope.
Ty Warner, Executive Director for NIRPC.
Claire Milo, Mayor of LaPorte.
Bob Schaefer, Council President, Town of Long Beach.
John Ensign, Town of Hebron, Council President.
Kevin Breitstein, Porter County Surveyor.
Good morning, Karen Raymond Wilson, Mayor of the City of Gary.
Representing George Van Til, Shannon Fever.
Tom McDermott, Mayor Hammond.
Diane Knoll, Town of Wanatuck, Clerk Treasurer. Pamela Richard, New Chicago, Town Council.
Bob Carnahan, Cedar Lake Town Council.
Tom Glauser, Town of Augustins Council. Jeff Benson, President, Beverly Shores Town Council, and immediate past chair. Greg Stinson, Town of Porter Council.
Dave Schaefer, Clerk Treasurer for the Town of Munster.
Ann Dobus, Town Council, Town of Griffith.
Mary Thorne, NIRPC staff.
Anthony Copeland, Mayor, City of East Chicago.
Roosevelt Allen, President, Lake County Commission.
Dave Hollenbeck, Legal Counsel to NIRPC.
Angie Hayes, NIRPC staff.
Joe Circovich, NIPT. Alan Hammond, NIRPC staff.
Jim Nowacki, resident of the City of Gary.
Joe Exel, NIRPC staff.
Sarah Gnoski, NIRPC staff.
Steven Sesterik, NIRPC staff.
Darrell Anderson, General Manager, Gary Public Transit. Ryan, young man, you're up. You can introduce yourself, please.
Dave Decker, I'm a County Commissioner from LaPorte County.
Very good. Steve Strange, NIRPC staff.
Chris Murphy with American Structure Point Engineers.
David Nellens, Munster Town Council.
Bill Brown, NIRPC staff.
Keith Benman with the Times.
David Wright, Gary Public Transportation Corporation.
Jody Melton, Director, Kankakee River Basin Commission, and NIRPC staff.
Rebecca Sis Williams, Deputy Clerk Treasurer, New Chicago.
Belinda Petrosky, NIRPC staff.
That completes it. Certification of appointment, Attorney David Hollenbeck.
Mr. Chairman, we have one certification this morning, that being from the LaPorte County Council, that Councilman Rick Morinski, I'm sorry, I apologize, has been appointed, and it is in proper form, so he is our commissioner on behalf of the LaPorte County Council.
Very good. Okay, let's move on. A couple of comments. As you know, a group from NIRPC recently attended the NARC conference in Washington, D.C. I would like a couple of the members that attended that event to make some comments about the conference and other meetings that occurred outside the conference. Claire, would you like to open up some comments?
Absolutely. I thought it was a very, very helpful conference, and then meetings that we had. I'd like to say positive, but I'm not entirely convinced of that. The bulk of our discussion at the conference and with the legislator meetings that we had was discussing the upcoming sequestration. And the message that NARC and all of our NIRPC contingent took to our members was that there are some very severe challenges that come with sequestration, and that we're very concerned about those challenges that will be upcoming that will impact transportation funding and community development programs, particularly the CDBG programs that many of us have as part of our municipalities or townships. And it was a fairly frustrating time, I think, in Washington, D.C., because the message that we received back from experts and from the members of Congress themselves seems to be that everyone is looking for the cuts to happen, that the sequestration seems that it will happen on March 1st. And across the board, everyone doesn't like it, but it looks like it's coming. And so our message was that this is a blunt instrument when it really needs to be a scalpel that addresses these challenges, because everyone recognizes that there needs to be a shift and that there are going to have to be some significant changes, but this is not necessarily the tool to use for those changes. So I think that it was good that we were out there and had those discussions, and I've received some feedback since then that some of the members are trying to continue to look at different options. So hopefully that will continue, and who knows, maybe before March 1st something will change, but it was good to be out there.
Blair summed it up pretty well. That kind of bleak. I've gone 4 years in a row, and each year it gets bleaker and bleaker. But some positive things. We did meet with our congressional leaders and senators. I was able to meet with Congressman Misklowski and Senator Donnelly. And since I'm the District 6 representative for NARC, representing all of you guys, and Illinois and Wisconsin and Minnesota, the NARC board was invited to the White House for a briefing, and Dave Schaefer, who's the president of NARC this year, and the rest of the board went into the EEOB, the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, and we had it with Ty as well, and we had a briefing with high-level people from FTA, Department of Transportation, HUD, and his Office of Environmental Quality, which was an interesting one, green infrastructure and climate change, and with direct phone numbers to these people and emails. And still being, the message was, the money message was bleak, but now at least there's communication channels that are being opened up to us that we've never had before. And that was a big step in taking NARC and regional councils as a resource for them. We tried to explain to them that they could learn a lot from us and about talking with each other and working collaboratively. So that was about the best news we had, but at least it was some good news.
So turn it over to the NARC chairman.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I recall, there were 207 delegates, policymakers and practitioners from across the country, and NARC had arranged for many members of the administration to make presentations. Probably the highest ranking administrator who was there was the Honorable Sean Donovan, the Secretary of HUD, and there were other assistant directors and so forth there who were giving excellent presentations. Not only was there an excellent opportunity to make calls on the Hill and also hear information, but it was the networking that's possible. You get to talk to people from California about the kinds of things that they're going through, and guess what? We're all going through the same process of figuring out sequestration, the same as everybody else across the country. And in that sense, it's kind of encouraging that misery loves company. But I think all in all, it was one of the better conferences that NARC has put together for this purpose.
Great, and I would add to that is it's interesting from the perspective of regional councils nationwide. There's a fair amount of turnover. Just that cohort has changed. So there was quite a bit of networking with other new executive directors and other regional councils, which is always good. On the congressional visits, just a note. We of course gave the message of the NIRPC's positions on reauthorization for Economic Development Administration, and then for MAP 21, the transportation reauthorization, which was only a 2-year bill, so we're already about half a year into that. The messages of equal treatment special treatment for transit and freight, and also for maintaining that 50,000 population threshold. If you remember, it was an attempt to go up to 200,000 earlier. And then also for the Highway Trust Fund to keep that solvent. So we came in with those messages as well. That was the congressional message, but several remarked on, Jeff mentioned the White House visit, that it was bode very well for regional councils that the day after the State of the Union address, that meeting was convened in the White House. It said it was important for those White House staff persons to meet with this group of regional councils that next morning. So I think that was bodes very well for NARC and for the state of regions and for regional councils in general across the country.
Very good. Let's move on to committee appointments. Chairman Uran has been working on this. I know he worked with past Chairman Jeff Benson on this. Rather than go through and go through the name of everyone on every assignment, we're not going to do that for the brevity of the meeting. Most of you know that his plan was to move vice chairmen up to chairman of the subcommittees, which many of you that are assuming those positions are already aware of that and working in those assignments. After the meeting, if there is confusion or questions about what committee you may be serving on, please see Ty or myself, and we can try to direct you on where your assignments are going to be for 2013. Jeff, any comments you might have in regards to this also? I know you have had some discussions.
The discussion that I've had is that one way to build leadership or raise your children is at some point you have to let go. And so I myself have been the chair of the NIRPC for 4 years straight out of my 5 on NIRPC. And it's good. It's good for connections, but it's also good to build leadership to pass the baton. Similarly, with the executive committee, this year it was my thought to ask Mayor McDermott, who had already been the chair, to get off and make room for some other leadership to be able to make the run to the top. Because
thanks a lot.
I want to know what he said.
But the point is that that's how you build leadership, is by giving people more responsibility and including other people instead of Tom and I hogging up the spots. So that's my only thoughts on it. It's a way of strengthening the organization.
I think it's important that you mentioned Mayor McDermott, and I just want to say thank you. To a mayor who we know has a very, very busy schedule, but never forsakes his responsibilities here at NIRPC. He served in about every position you could serve here, and even now, not serving necessarily on the executive board, you see him here today. That speaks volumes of his regard for NIRPC and what NIRPC is doing for the region as a whole. So it's people like Mayor McDermott, I think, that inspires us younger elected officials. I don't think that let me be very clear. That's not very clear. Not in age, but in time of service in our individual communities. Of our commitment level to NIRPC. And I just want to say, Mayor McDermott, thank you for being a somewhat of a role model to those of us that...
I didn't know where to sit today, by the way. I walked around.
But,
me too, Tom.
So, and I know there's many of you in this room, there's many people in here that have served for years. Mr. Schaefer, many of you in this room have served many positions and continue to be faithful and committed to NIRPC's cause. I think that speaks volumes. So thank you all. Okay, again, see Ty or myself after the meeting if you're not sure where you're aligning with committees, and we'll be glad to help you after the meeting. Okay, let's move on to approval of the minutes for the January 17, 2013 meeting. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns? If not, do I have a motion?
So moved.
The motion, do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Can I ask a question for
Yes.
clarification? I made a motion, and I'm on the executive committee, but I don't get a vote as my position as immediate past chair. So do you need somebody else to make a motion?
That is correct.
Yes.
So do I have
You need a member of the executive board to make the motion.
So I'm a member, but I can't vote. So am I allowed to make that motion? That's why.
No.
There you
So-
go. So you need somebody. You need to
Yeah.
redo.
So let's okay, we have a motion, do we have a second? We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes of January 17th.
Parliamentarian.
Again, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
Goofing this up.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, consent agenda, the Environmental Management Policy Committee and Local Government Assistance Advisory Committee. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as submitted?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the consent agenda as submitted.
Have a second?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. If there's no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, let's go to Finance and Personnel. I know they have a very intense, busy meeting this morning. I'll turn that over to Blair Milo, the chair.
We did meet prior to this meeting to discuss a few different issues. For the executive committee's review, first we had the Kankakee River Basin Commission contract. This is a routine contract that we update every year that is for Jody Melton to service in capacity as director of the Kankakee River Basin Commission. The NIRPC provides the sort of umbrella organization for him to operate under for the KRBC, and they provide the bulk of the funding there. The only change in this contract from the previous year is that NIRPC has provided in its 2013 calendar year budget $20,000 to be used as local share usage purposes of KRBC. That is a change from $25,000, so it's decreased by $5,000. So I would, it is the Finance and Personnel Committee's recommendation to the Executive Committee to approve this contract. And I move to approve this contract.
Do we have a second?
Second.
A motion and a second. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
The second issue that we addressed was the environmental marketing contract. This has been a discussion for a few years with the Environmental Committee, and that Kathy Luther has worked on significantly for a contract with Hurons and Company Communications to do marketing for the air quality public education program. It's for an amount of $42,500 for marketing support services and $127,500 for media buying and placement. The media buying and placement is for things such as airtime, billboards, those kinds of things. $2,500 is for labor costs. I believe that this will be excellent use to help promote air quality public education and be able to work with some of the professionals in this field. So it is the recommendation of the Finance and Policy Committee to approve this contract, and I make a motion to approve the contract as submitted.
Second.
A motion and a second to approve as presented. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
And the final agenda item that we have is on the proposed 2013 budget amendment. This is the best kind of budget amendment to have. That there was $2,773 on the old postage meter that we would like to be able to pay into communication expenses, allocated functions. So it's an increase to that line item of $2,773, taking it to a total of $40,273. I make a motion to approve this budget amendment as submitted.
Second.
A motion and a second to approve as presented. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
And we had one other item that we discussed this morning, and that the lease of this building will be up at the end of this year. So the staff members working with the Finance and Personnel Committee are continuing to work with the Northwest Indiana Forum on the requirements, the space needs for NIRPC's office requirements, and are continuing to pursue that with the forum in order to put together a request for proposals to have a fair and open competition for what needs to happen as far as housing requirements at the end of this year when the lease process is up. Angie Hayes is the staff personnel or staff person that's the point of contact for that. If any member of the commission has any questions about the process or where we are in working through some of those things, then Angie would be the person to talk to, and they will continue to move forward with that process with putting together a request for proposals.
Question. Who's the landlord? Does the city of Portage own this facility?
Portage Redevelopment.
Portage Redevelopment Commission.
Okay.
I think there's a question.
Sure.
Yeah, are we paying particular attention to the ADA compliance requirements for public buildings, whatever our consideration?
Absolutely. In fact, that's driven by some of the deficiencies in this building in that regard, but
I was going to bring that up.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
There's no problem, right? I mean, we anticipate renewing the lease. I mean, there's no problem, right?
Well, I think that we've been candid with Portage that it is going to be put out for competitive proposals. So although there's no necessarily rush to not stay here, I think there is going to be a competitive process in place. And I guess is the
We got places in Hammond really good.
well, and I think Chairman Milo, you want to make some comments that we encourage communities who may have an appropriate place to submit for consideration. We do want people, because like Attorney Hollenbeck said, who better than people that represent this board knows the individual communities where there may be an appropriate location. So any comments?
Sure. At this point, we're simply working through the process of categorizing and coordinating all of the space needs and making sure that a statement of needs or a scope of work is conclusive for the process moving forward. But as we gather that, then I think it'd be great to have input from any of the other members of the commission if there are locations for consideration that you would like to bring forward to the committee. Certainly, competition certainly is a good thing. And if there are ideas, thoughts that other individuals have for other locations, and we want to encourage that participation. And then that way we can, when we're having to go through the process of evaluating all of those different locations, then we'll be able to have hopefully a wider field and then give the best location from that.
A little bit of history. Back in 1996, NIRPC was in Highland, and we moved out here, and Lake County almost totally withdrew from the NIRPC board and were going to align themselves up with somebody else. So if we were to move back to Lake County, I hope nobody else would do what we were going to do.
You were going to tell me there was good restaurants.
There is one right.
Bob, the whole story is we were in a grocery store.
I attended that place.
I remember those grocery store. I remember it when it was a grocery store before it was.
I don't remember that.
Anyone else? Okay. Does that conclude your report?
That concludes my report.
All right. Let's move on to TPC. Stan Novus, the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Transportation Policy Committee met on February 12th. We had 3 actions for consideration today. The committee heard updates from the staff on the Northwest Indiana Rail Visions activities, roadway functional classification process, and the time frame for the air quality conformity process. Resolution 13-03 on pages 23 through 25 would adopt the 22nd Amendment to the fiscal year 2012-2015 Transportation Improvement Program for road projects. Gary Evers will explain that action.
Thank you, Stan. Short list of projects this morning that we're adding to the TIP. Beginning with the 2 NDOT small structure projects, one on US 6 in the vicinity, in the vicinity of Westville. The first one, and the second one is City of Gary on I-65. An unusual project that we're adding this month is complete replacement of Norfolk Southern's passive rail crossing, the crossbuck signs throughout the state. NDOT is putting $400,000 into this project. Norfolk Southern is matching those dollars and replacing system-wide all of their passive crossing guards. So what you see here, although we don't show a dollar amount, I believe we've got a number of crossings within Lakeport and LaPorte counties. I believe the biggest concentration, I think, is in the vicinity of Schneider in southern Lake County. So that is where those projects are going. 4 local projects this morning. The first one is a re-amendment. This is US 30 intersection improvements in the vicinity of Valparaiso from Hayes Leonard Road all the way east to State Road 49. The city will be implementing this project with the funding as shown. City of Gary is bringing forth a Safe Routes to Schools planning study to study the bicycle and pedestrian needs of school-aged children within the city of Gary. And finally, 2 exciting projects, congestion relief emissions reduction projects that were brought forth by U.S. Steel in cooperation with the city of Gary. These will involve the replacement of engines in 2 locomotives that are older than I am. So this is one of the most significant emissions reductions projects that we've had come through our doors because those engines are so old and so dirty. The city has graciously offered to step in and oversee that project. With that said, we would ask for your approval of this amendment to our transportation improvement program.
Mr. Chairman, if there's no questions, the committee moves for request adoption of this resolution. 1303. 1303. Is that a motion? No, I can't make it.
I'm sorry, you're not on the board. That's right. Do I have a motion? I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. The 23rd Amendment of the Transportation Improvement Program has an emergency amendment on a railroad crossing on US 30 in LaPorte County. We need no action on this amendment. Resolution 13-04 on pages 26 through 28 would adopt the 24th Amendment of the fiscal year 2012-2015 Transportation Improvement Program for transit projects. Linda Barkowski will explain that.
Hi, Stephen. Got away from him. As you see on page 28, there's a list of projects, minor additions to our fiscal year 13 tip for transit. Basically doing some computer upgrades with the funds from 2012 that we want to finish up. And then GPTC is bringing in some of their fiscal year 13 operating funds under the new federal legislation. And then NICD needs a new transformer for a substation, I think Ogden Dunes. Joe, right, he told me that. I'll answer any questions, or Joe is here from NICD, and GPTC has got its 2 top head honchos here, so if you have any questions. Yeah, not the most titillating subject in the world, computer replacements.
Mr. Chairman, the Transportation Policy Committee recommends adoption of Resolution 1304.
Any discussion? Do I have a motion? Motion. Have a second? Member Adams, and second. Okay, there's no further discussion. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Resolution 1305 on pages 29 through 34 would establish the selection process for projects to be funded under the new Transportation Alternative Program. Mitch Barlow will explain this action.
Hello, Stan. Good morning. I'm going to take a little bit of time to give a little presentation on this because there has been some changes to the Transportation Enhancement Program. I'll warn you up front, there are a lot of acronyms. I'll be gentle. Basically what we have, MAP 21 was adopted last year in June, and it created what we call the Transportation Alternatives Program. It is a successor to the Transportation Enhancement Program. Okay? Basically, the way it works is now the TAP program has incorporated 2 new programs, Safe Routes to School, as well as some roadway projects. Thankfully, we don't have a lot of roadway projects to deal with here in this region regarding this program. As for tap dancing here in the state of Indiana, it now provides funds directly to the MPOs and local governments through INDOT. Indiana will continue the recreational trail program that will be due on May 1st. Every May 1st, the state can transfer up to 50% of their TAP programs, so these other surface transportation, CMAC, HSIP, or MPOs can get that. It's a 2-year bill, so we're going to be back at this again in a couple of years. We will need to make up the difference in other programs that have been a shortfall because TAP has about $1.2 million when it comes down to it. PE had about $2 million for the Northwest Indiana region, so we've taken a hit in the enhancement area. And it does not establish specific standards for competitive process. That's the federal guidance. This is why I'm coming before you today for the local NIRPC guidance. TAP is distributed throughout the state of Indiana through 7 MPOs. And we are one of those MPOs, and these numbers are not right, but again, these are the 7 MPOs that are directly receiving TAP money. Beforehand, all MPOs got it, but now it's only those with 200,000 or more in their area. We had several workshops to talk about, and we talked about the new TAP application. We determined eligible projects, eligible phases. We did a ranking process for the Safe Routes to School program, funding targets, local match obligation, application review process, and the revised priority corridor. So we basically took the entire application process and put it through the washer to revise it for the TAP. Okay, so we did several types of reviews. There are now several ineligible projects, safety and educational activities for bike and peds, acquisition of scenic easements, visitor and welcome centers, operation of historic transportation facilities, proactive archaeological planning, transportation museums. These were all eligible currently or formerly under the TE program. Probably the most notable of it was the Porter County Convention and Visitors. The Dorothy Buell Center for the Indiana Dunes was actually built with TE money. And the LaPorte, in the city of LaPorte, your train station was actually improved with TE money. So those are now defunct. Proposed categories here. This is what has been approved by the Pedal and Paddle Committee, the Transportation Policy Committee, as well as the Environmental Management Policy Committee. Pedestrian and bicycle projects will receive 80% of the funding that will be on the table here from INDOT. The max request will be 1/3 of that 80% of funding. Historic projects and environment will have 10% of the total funding. The max request there will be half of that funding. And then Safe Routes to Schools is the third and the newest category. Safe Routes to Schools was a program that actually existed on its own. INDOT programmed that on their own, and there was really the only thing the MPOs did was sign the application forms. Now we directly program Safe Routes to School monies. And that is, again, more projects that we have to fund, less money that we have to fund with. But 10% of the total pot will go to Safe Routes to School, broken down into infrastructure projects and non-infrastructure projects. A lot of changes here. The elimination of all language pertaining to INDOT application is off. There's no safety bonus in our new application. Bonus points for previously awarded TAP projects. Now that we have less money to deal with, now that we have a ceiling that is lower than previous TE, projects most likely cannot come in for the full kitty. They're going to have to come in for multi-year awards to actually finish their job. With that said, we will award those projects, give them a little bit of a bonus for previous awards to get them through their funding requirements. We have eliminated bonus for the maintenance plan, but we'll provide a template. Other changes with the TAP application here. No more billboard removal and no more boulevard restoration. Surveys for Safe Routes to School now have a 4-year window. The EMPC, the Environmental Management Policy Committee, will directly rank their projects from now on. Before, this was a process that the Pedal and Paddle Committee did. Now we've given it to the EMPC. All project phases are allowed from right-of-way to engineering to construction, and there is no change in the cash match. That is still an 80-20 program. Technically, with the environmental area, Joe Exel is here representing the Environmental Department, and he put together a committee. They brought this before the Environmental Policy Committee, and just earlier this month they approved these new changes to the environmental thing. The environmental section, that is, expansion to 3 subcategories are now here. Water pollution mitigation, wildlife and aquatic protection and habitat connectivity, and vegetation management. The EMPC will now review, rank, and directly program that amount of money that is allocated that we have decided upon, at least proposed before all of you, at 10% of the full amount. It could be more depending on what type of projects come forward. So that is a big change for the EMPC. We have a question. Yes, Jeff.
Well, I was going to suggest that you give a ballpark figure.
Do you want me to do that?
Well, you'd thrown up a number and said those numbers aren't right, but the old census was guessed at about 950,000, and you think it's going to be roughly $1 million, that 80% is going to go to the
trails,
and 10%, which is $100,000. So this would represent about $100 grand.
Yes. About 100 grand for environmental projects.
And the safe routes for school, about 100 grand.
And about yes, exactly.
That's all. Just so
Thank you. And I hate to use actual dollars because, again, we're still trying to figure that out. I don't know if we have a final amount yet. You have another question, Mayor?
Mitch, in Hammond, as you know, we're doing bridges to link our bike trails over busy streets.
Yes, you are.
65th being one of them. A couple of the places we're landing the bridges are actually schools. Would that mean that those bike trail bridges would qualify for safe routes to schools funding?
We'd have to talk about that.
I mean, how close to the school does that have to be? One of them's actually in the parking lot of the school.
Well, it's definitely within the radius that's allowed. So that's definitely a project. Now, again, it depends on how much money we have max here. We're talking about $70,000 max. I mean, bridges aren't cheap, but it could help.
Right.
So we could talk, definitely. Bob?
We currently have two projects in the loop right now. Are those going to be affected by any of this new?
No, two projects specifically.
For safe routes to school?
Oh, no. Those are going to go forward. All right. Yeah, previous projects are all going forward. There's no problem with that at all. This is just from this day forward. Okay? All right. Let's see. I did want to bring up I just want to highlight with you, too, that the Environmental Policy Committee has now put themselves well out in front of any other MPO in the state, if not the nation, regarding environmental standards. Traditionally, TE only allowed throughout the country less than 1% of their total funding to environmental projects. We have one of the most proactive and progressive environmental committees here, pretty much of any MPO I can imagine throughout the country, and because of that, they've taken a real long, hard look at these standards, and we get these things approved, we're going to be way out front and possibly setting a precedent for environmental ranking and review throughout the country. So that's some good news on our part here. The last thing I want to talk about is some changes that we made to the regional trail priority corridor map. This is just a matrix telling you of how we went through it with the high, medium, and low priority corridors, talking about how those were ranked accordingly. The map itself is here. There were some minor changes that were actually made to it after some discussion regarding going back to scratch. We didn't do that. We just changed some names around here. There's a Chessie corridor in LaPorte. There's some new corridors that have been put in. The Michigan Central corridor here in north central Lake County, just for a couple of them. The Old Plank Road Trail corridor was put out here. That comes out of Dyer into Chicago Heights in the South Chicago suburbs. So we had that taken a look at and brought that to the forefront and got that all taken care of as well. Okay, that's not Photoshopped either. I'll take any questions at this time. Again, it has been put up the food chain, and that's what we're here for approval. Yes, Mayor.
2008, you took that photo, right?
Sir, yes, sir.
Not too often you can take that picture.
No, it isn't. Take advantage when you can, yes.
There's no question, Mr. Chairman. The committee recommends adoption of resolution 13-05. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This summer, NIRPC is scheduled for a planning certification review by FHWA and FTA. The federal agencies will be here from June 18th to the 20th for discussion on the planning process in Northwest Indiana. Their report should be available late this summer. The next Transportation Policy Committee will be scheduled on Tuesday, March 12th at the Michigan City City Hall. So I just want everyone to be aware of that. And with that, I would, this concludes my report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Phillips. Let's move on to Legislative Committee. Mr. Schaefer.
Mr. Chairman, the Legislative Committee has not met since this board last met. So I really have no report, but I would defer to the executive director. I think that Ty has made some visits down to Indianapolis, and maybe some of those are of interest.
Yeah, in fact, I was going to talk about some of this during my report, but let me go ahead and talk about some of that. So after the NARC conference in DC, right after that in Indianapolis was the Indiana Association of Regional Councils legislative briefing. So we were able to do kind of a 1-2 punch. In other words, I just met with Senator Donnelly, Congressman Skoski, and Congresswoman Walorski, and staff from Senator Coates' office, and then was able to see those staff members the very next day at from their home representatives, staff people in Indianapolis, and follow up on that same message that we had brought to DC. So we were able to do that with the staff here in state as well as the national level.
That's all I have, sir.
Okay. Let's move on to, I don't believe Mr. Alderman's here. Is there anyone here from NDOT to represent Mr. Alderman? Hearing not, we'll move on past to the next. That would be the Northwest Indiana Economic Development District. Mr. Allen.
Mr. Chair, the Northwest Indiana Economic Development District met on January 25th. The SEDS Committee will be meeting to score additional projects that have been submitted by the communities, and so that the scoring was discussed, the scoring process. Also, the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategic Plan. It's in the final stages, and the update will be released to the public sometime in March. And this SEDS document will go to print and will be available through NIRPC, and a copy of it will be posted on our website. Our website is nwiedd.com. Also, the scope of the EDA grant work is complete. We will be planning a meeting with Mr. Warner to discuss an action plan for the remainder of 2013. Also, I'd like to mention, I think I mentioned it before, that the website is up and running. And communities can submit projects to be included in the SED via the website. Gary has submitted an application for funding for their university project, and we're working with the city officials from Gary. They have applied for a technical planning assistance grant in the amount of $100,000. Also, I'm working at the county level with the city officials for the additional parcels of land that they require for their university park project. We're also working with the representatives from Purdue University, Calumet, along with the Hammond Development Corporation, because they are submitting an application for a public works grant for their commercialization center project. This public works grant would be $1 million grant. For anyone that's interested, I want to mention that the deadline for submitting a public works grant is, the current deadline is March 13th. And the next deadline is June 13th. Technical planning and assistance grants can be submitted at any time. The EDA continues to operate under the congressional resolution. I know everybody's concerned about the sequester, what's going to happen March 1st, and how that's going to affect federal funding. The next meeting of the full board will be in April. I'd like to indicate that the SEDS committee meets on demand whenever it's necessary, so we don't have a regular meeting schedule. Whenever we need to meet, we meet. Sometimes we can meet a couple of times a week, 3 times a week. Sometimes it might just be once in a week, but we meet on demand because our relationship with the EDA is a dynamic relationship, and it's constantly in process. Some of the things that we have completed, I mentioned in the in the past. We have our database of economic development professionals and key stakeholders, which was required by the EDA. We have our web site up and working. We have built awareness. We've gone around with the presentations, individual meetings, public outreach, media presentations to build public awareness of the district's activities. We have fulfilled the EDA reporting and compliance requirements, and we're continuing to do that. We have established the process for identifying the projects and moving them forward to the economic development and other federal and state funding sources. We have pursued a partnership with Jumpstart to leverage stimulus resources to assist in the urban core areas. And we continue to update our SEDS annually as required by the Economic Development Administration. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Other business? There's no other business from the chair. Is there any other business? Okay, let's move on to, yes.
I was wondering, the legislative committee, there was a bill that came up floated by Representative Mara Candelaria regarding NIRPC and the composition of the board. It was sent to summer study committee, and I don't think that's on our radar at legislative committee. I was going to wait until I heard the report, but I didn't hear it. Are we going to start covering that bill? I mean, it's in summer study, and obviously I think it has a lot to do with NIRPC.
Sounds like it's of interest to this group. Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Yeah, it's sent to summer study, and I know the first proposal gave the mayors of the largest cities appointments on the board, which we don't have now. I know Mary Karen, even though NICD does pass through her area and has 2 stations in Gary, she doesn't have an appointment, 3, excuse me. She doesn't have an appointee on the board. Neither do I as Mayor Hammond. It's a big issue. Neither does Mayor Copeland as the mayor of East Chicago. I thought Representative Candelaria Reardon's bill was a good idea, and it died basically, and I know NICD was opposed, and all due respect to NICD, but I think that's something we should monitor personally, because I think it's a good idea.
I don't think it died, did it?
It went to summer study.
Also, I think that you have to closely monitor, I think it's Senate Bill 528, because it kind of modifies the way the casino revenue is distributed. You know, they are eliminating the admissions tax, and they're supplanting it with something called a supplemental gaming tax.
Right.
But so far, it kind of works to the advantage of the state government when it's actually local casino revenue that the local communities have. So that's something that we have to follow, because it's going to affect all of the communities up here that are use casino revenue to supplement their budgets.
That is correct, Mr. Chair. The impact on Lake County is estimated to be $8 million now. I would presume that there would also be a negative impact on Porter, on LaPorte County, because it deals with those casinos who actually have casinos, or those communities that have casinos in their communities.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, I mean, I don't know how Hammond escaped damage on 528. I think it's because they based everything off 2002 numbers, and we rebuilt our boat since then. So Hammond's fiscal impact isn't great, but I am going to stand with the other communities, because, you know, we have to stand together. We can't stand apart. And I think it's a good idea if we monitored that bill as well, because even though 528 doesn't deal directly with NIRPC, it does deal with money that's used for infrastructure, which affects NIRPC. And that would be millions of dollars lost. So I think that would be a good idea as well.
Yeah, you know, it's kind of ironic. They keep placing greater burdens on the local governments. The state transfers revenue into the state coffers, and then they tell us to go to the local governments to recover or recapture the money that's federally being transferred to the state. And the state gets up and says, we have a balanced budget and a surplus, and the local communities are struggling, trying to make ends meet and to satisfy their constituents. So it's really bad.
Yes.
One other thing, and Mayor Milo can speak to this probably better than I, that when we were were in Washington, one of the things that we were mentioning and asking our representatives to keep their eye on was there's movement towards changing the tax benefits on municipal bonds, which would greatly affect cities also. If they make that taxable, then it's no longer an investment opportunity. And so that's something that should be on the radar as well.
Just a comment. I didn't like the fact that they're going to give the Indianapolis 500 $100 million, I believe, when we couldn't rebuild Klein Avenue.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Also, I think it's Senate Bill 520 that has to do with utility companies tracking costs that they can add automatically without going through any kind of review whatsoever. And after 300 days, if they haven't had a hearing on it, then it just becomes in the bill. And I think anybody that's, especially Northwest Indiana, with the heavy electrical usage we have, that could affect a lot of companies. Individuals too.
Can I tack on to what Mr. Decker's talking about? I totally agree with Mr. Decker on this. It's NIPSCO, I follow Wall Street pretty closely. NIPSCO reported yesterday record profits for their company. And then the same day they're reporting record profits, they're in the newspaper talking about another bill where they're going to be able to tack on charges without even going through the IURC. How could they, on one hand, say we got record profits? And by the way, Mr. Skaggs reported 2013 is going to be even rosier than 2012 was. And at the same time, they're talking about tacking charges onto us without even a process of going through the IURC. It's ludicrous, Mr. Decker. I totally agree with you. It's ludicrous.
As a county, LaPorte County commissioners last night put a resolution together opposing this.
It'd be a good idea if you could get that resolution into NIRPC and maybe it can get circulated to the other communities for resolution.
You'll have it this afternoon.
All right. If there's nothing else, let's go to public comment. Mr. Chair, can you speak? Yes, sir.
Yes. Good morning, commissioners. My name is Jim Nowacki. I'm a resident of the city of Gary. I'd like to comment on the Transportation Policy Committee Resolution 1303, some of the things contained in there. I'm not going to comment on the city of Gary using our scarce resources to buy a new train set for U.S. Steel. I'd rather talk about the Safe Routes to School program and the funding. Appears to be a nice plum for some planner, $75,000, and I hope that it won't be an academic exercise. The city of Gary has the most unsafe routes to school of any community in the entire state. Our sidewalks, there's no program in our city to replace sidewalks, and sidewalks have not been replaced in decades. This is not a small consideration to myself because I do a lot of walking around the city. And well, I doubt that the $75,000 would have done very much if we'd applied it to an actual program. We do need money applied to concrete that's on the ground, replacing our sidewalks and providing those safe routes. So I'm going to urge that when we look at the plan, I'm sure the planner is not going to speak with pedestrians. Planners talk to other planners, and that's expected. But if he were to talk to pedestrians, he would find that the need is so great that if we're talking about a 4-year program for replacing sidewalks, we're going to fall far short. We built a new school out at Route 20 and Old Hobart Road. I don't think there's a sidewalk within a mile of that school. We put in the new sidewalk on Hobart, the new road on Hobart, the new Old Hobart Road. When we had the train crash back in Easter a year ago, all the heavy equipment tore that road apart. I brought it up to the NIRPC in the past. Nothing's been done about it. The road is in terrible shape. Money just wasted. I don't know if the railroad's going to pay for it or not, but I'm just going to urge NIRPC. We were looking at the greatest needs. Gary certainly has the greatest needs for safe routes to school. I hope that the planners do a good job and kids have a chance to walk to school. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chair? Yes.
I'd like to clarify something, because I appreciate your public comment, but there's a correction that I can't let hang out there. And it has to do with Gary spending money on U.S. Steel. And I was on the CMAC committee when these projects were determined to be eligible back in 2009. And what the city of Gary is doing is stepping up and being the LPA, the local public authority, so that the project can qualify for funds. They're partnering with U.S. Steel. But this is not taxpayers' money. This is U.S. Steel's money being the match, and the city of Gary is stepping up and being the facilitator. So they can still spend money on concrete and do other things very good for the community, as well as something like this to help clean the air. So
Great.
Just a point of correction. Thanks.
Thank you for that clarification. Any other public comment? Hearing none, we'll go to announcements. Mr. Carnahan, you got anything?
I don't have
Any other announcements? All right, we'll go to the report. Yes.
In the corner.
Okay.
The town of New Chicago will be having groundbreaking on a $6 million project we got for our water lines. They've been in the ground since 1953. It'll be Saturday under the water tower. Our town's small. It's at 320 Cleveland, and we're real excited about our project.
That's a state revolving fund
Yes, a
project.
state revolving fund project.
Okay, if there's nothing other, we'll turn it over to the executive director, Ty Ward.
Great, thanks. Well, nice to be at my first executive board meeting. It's been a fantastic transition. Again, I want to thank staff for just being tremendous for this transition. It's been good. I've been connecting with groups from far-flung, from the MPO councils to the paddlers association to you name it, and it's been great. But what I want to focus comments on today is the last few weeks and the trips that were set up before I started, but I think were very productive, and I think the message I want to leave with today. Went and spoke at the New Partners for Smart Growth Conference in Kansas City on our planning efforts. Did that with Dennis Rittenmeyer from One Region, and Arthur Pearson from the Donnelly Foundation, and Joanna Trotter from the Metropolitan Planning Council. Getting a national audience, both with the comprehensive regional plan and just with everything that you're doing around this region. Showed a lot of great slides on the progress that this region has made over the past however many years. And it was well received, and I couldn't keep those 2040 brochures on the little information table fast enough. They went flying off the table at this national conference. So great story being told about Northwestern Indiana, and a great discussion about what's happening here and about its future. And that tied right into the trips to NARC at DC and to the time in Indianapolis after that. It was a whirlwind chain of these events. But if I were to pull out one theme from all these, it's the importance of telling the story of what's happening here. That was the message, and my takeaway from the congressional representatives that we met with is for things like sequestration, for things like the other impacts in this region, the more that we can actually tell specific stories about how it's affecting your communities on the ground level and be able to share those very concrete stories about how these things happening at the federal level and elsewhere affecting your communities, the more effective that message will be and what to do about it. And so as I went from telling the story of Northwestern Indiana to getting that message from our congressional folks to give them our stories, I think there's a common theme here of trying to build on what NIRPC's done, trying to package that and trying to present that in a much stronger way so that we can be more successful in being able to deal with these impacts such as sequestration when it takes effect. And I think that's concludes my report, but that's the message we need.
That I shared with some of the other members of the delegation that went out to Washington, D.C. that when we were out in D.C., I had the opportunity to meet up with some of the individuals that I worked with, and one of the admirals that I worked with at the Pentagon, and was chatting with him about some of the effects of sequestration and how that's impacted defense, the defense levels. And he was sharing with me that I think it's now almost 2 weeks ago that the Navy announced that they would not be deploying the Harry S. Truman Strike Group. And that's a aircraft carrier strike group. And I was trying to put together the numbers just based off of some of my previous experience of deploying with a carrier strike group. And so I think that's about 7,500 sailors that deploy with those groups. And they found out, then the Navy announced that they weren't deploying this group due to the funding constraints. They found out 2 days prior to that deployment that they would not be going out. And so anybody that's ever spent any time around an individual that's getting ready for a deployment of any sort, it takes months to prepare for this. And you don't necessarily know how long you're going to be gone, so leases are ended, utilities have to be wrapped up, you put everything in storage, and your cell phone contract, all these kinds of things. And so you spend a lot of time building up for this. If you're a single parent, then you have to arrange for child care for your child during that time period that you're going to be gone. And so I think that it's important that folks understand the impact of this sequestration, and that I don't know that that message is being conveyed, that there are some who think that, that the impacts are not going to be as bad as they appear on March 1st. They're already that bad, that we're impacting our armed forces in this way. I believe that the follow-on message that the Navy announced last week was that they're no longer doing, or they're canceling the maintenance periods for ships for the next couple of quarters. No maintenance for the ships that we're maintaining or not maintaining in our fleets. So that was something that I shared with the members of the delegation after talking with some of the colleagues that I worked with. This is a significant shift in how we're doing business or not doing business. That it's a major impact to those sailors, not to mention there's a reason why we deploy these carrier strike groups of national and international security. So that was the message.
So it really bothered me when I got that email, so I sent the email to Congressman Wisłowski and I asked him to read it, and if he could pass it on to the other congressmen so they realize just how important their decisions are. And I would suggest if you could send them on to your congressmen and maybe senators so that maybe they will wake up and start making sure they can get something done.
That concludes the items on the agenda. Let the record reflect we finished up at 10:07. I have a motion to adjourn. So moved. Motion to adjourn. Take care. All right.